Are you contributing to child labor every time you go shopping?
Desde los 8 años empecé a cortar café. Lo hacíamos en un costal.
Algunos van chicos como de 8 años. Lo único que me acuerdo que cortaba aquí cuando era chiquito, como 7, algo así, aprendí a cortar.
The statistics are staggering. More than 152 million girls and boys are being forced to work around the world right now. More than $30 billion worth of imports are coming into Canada that are at risk of being made by children or forced labor. And that includes almost $4 billion in risky food imports like coffee and sugar. That's almost 10% of all the food coming into Canada. Joining me, I'm so pleased to welcome Senator Julie Milleville-Duchesne. She is a member of the Senate of Canada and the sponsor of a modern slavery bill in Canada that we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. And also joining me is Julie Francoeur, who's the Executive Director of Fair Trade Canada. So a warm welcome to you both.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let me start with you, Julie Francoeur. We know from recent research that 70% of the child labor in risky goods coming into Canada can be found in agriculture. This should be a concern for every Canadian, frankly, every time they go to the grocery store. Tell us a little bit about this problem and also maybe how does fair trade help?
Yeah, as you say, especially today where our only, weekly outing is in the grocery store, it's directly connected to, to food and to what we put in our shopping basket every day. So some of the goods that you have in your report, like coffee being number one, Canada drinks a lot of coffee. It's the number one thing we drink even before water. There's a lot of underlying causes, but at the bottom of it all, there's poverty. Poverty is one of the main reasons for it. So if we think of cocoa, which is one that a lot of Canadians, associate to child labor, we think there's 2 million children in child labor in West Africa alone. And if you think that the average cocoa farmer in Ivory Coast and Ghana earns less than $1.50 a day, is the connections, awareness of consumers on one side. We have a lot of teams working at Origin to work with farmers, with cooperatives, with producers themselves, and how they can tackle it in their communities. And we work really hard with others to have that visibility.
When we talk about supply chain, sometimes these are terms that we're familiar with because we deal with it. But the supply chain is really how we get the ingredients from goods right from the place where they are produced or farmed through transportation all the way to manufacturers, perhaps, or producers in Canada or companies here, right through to the grocery store shelves, right?
Yeah, exactly. Even bananas have multiple steps in between ownership from the field to the grocery store and you buying it.
Well, and that really opens up the conversation I want to have with Senator Julie Milleville-Duchesne. Julie Francoeur a moment ago was saying that Canadians sometimes think that the goods are safe, that there's no child labor in things that are in our grocery stores, but we know that's not the case. I'd love to hear you tell us a little bit about your modern slavery bill.
So yes, so in a nutshell, what you call the modern slavery bill, S216, is what we call a transparency bill. The idea is to have large companies doing business in Canada. It's to ask them to report publicly once a year on their effort to reduce or prevent the risk of modern slavery, forced labor, or child labor in their supply chain. This is a pretty high standard, and upper management can be liable if they have false information in this report. People think that Canada is doing much more because in general, in terms of speech, we're pretty good. So if I took on the responsibility to present a bill in the Senate, it's because the government is not acting. And at the same time, 90% of Canadians say they would want to know if they're forced labor or child labor in what they buy, and they want the government to do something. So it's time to act, I think.
Doesn't this add an undue burden or too much expense for companies to have to meet these obligations?
Well, we have chosen to limit this obligation to report to large companies who are already reporting on all kinds of things. So it's not an undue burden. And don't forget, the UK and Australia already have modern slavery bills. So some of the international companies are already reporting in other countries. The main harm would be that if a company does not report who does it poorly, it will be public and it will be a tool used and that could taint their reputation. And as we all know, companies need a good reputation to attract investors, to attract consumers. So it's to their benefit to play the game and do this reporting and do it seriously.
Well, we certainly hope that Canadians who are watching this will get engaged with this and learn more about the bill and other steps. I would like to come back to Julie Franco. Julie, you work with large companies all the time. They work with you in fair trade. What's your sense of how companies are ready or concerned about these developments in tackling the issue of child or forced labor?
Yeah, we work with very large and very small companies and everyone in between. And I think one thing that they all have in common when it comes to forced labor and child labor is, one, they want reassurance that it doesn't happen in their supply chain already. They typically want that both for, their own clear conscience sometimes, but also for just to make sure they don't suddenly get exposed publicly about something that might happen in their supply chain. Sugar is a great example. Sugar is a product with a high risks of forced labor, of environmental degradation, child labor, and it's a super cheap product. So if you go to the average, grocery store to buy a kilo of sugar, it's very, very cheap. So if you're trying to do this ethically, sustainably, environmentally, you're going to obviously have higher costs in your supply chain. So to at least force, a minimum level playing field, a minimum bar that companies have to meet so that sustainable companies have a chance at actually competing a lot more on fair grounds.
World Vision research has indicated that more than 8 million children have been forced into work, forced labor, child labor, because of the global pandemic. And partly it's because of this economic impact. We talk about what we call the 3D jobs that are dirty, dangerous, and degrading, bad working conditions. And the concern is that it's only going to get worse. But when you look at the supply chain issue and fair trade globally, how is COVID-19 having an impact?
It's had a massive impact, not just violations on human rights, on child labor, forced labor, but also on environmental standards. If there's nobody to check, if there's no inspectors from government, whether it's labor inspectors or others that are coming out, the risks are much higher. The costs of production have gone up. So all of that is just a perfect system to, unfortunately, a much increased demand for child labor. So all of that together make everybody's work more complex and means we need to work together even more and rely more on governments to step up, on companies to step up even more. How will we build that back so that the gains of work against child labor are not entirely lost?
And I would just add, we have to open our hearts because since the beginning of this pandemic, we've been thinking about our own security, our masks, our gloves, being able to find a doctor. But the issues are much more severe abroad. There is more modern slavery during those difficult times. We're really pressuring the government on that front right now.
What message do you want to leave with Canadians who are getting ready to go to the grocery store to make their choices? What message do you want them to understand or know?
Well, that contrary to what they would think, there is forced labor or child labor in many of the things we buy. So look at the labels, read about it, know that in certain products it's more prevalent. We need friendly tools to be able to go to the supermarket and do shopping that is fair. But it can be done. And I hope that the bill that I'm introducing and that may pass. So the companies also will be pushed to do more.
I think as consumers, we have a lot more power than we think, and not just through the buying, but also through our words. When we talk to companies, the number one thing that gets them moving is when they tell us, our consumers have actually told us. So would you tell, whether it's the grocery store that we buy from, and that could even be telling the clerk at the cashier, hey, what do you guys do about child labor? Or what do you guys do about, fairness in wages in your supply chain? that gets escalated if it's frequent enough, but it could be on bulletin boards or online. Passing a message to the stores that you buy from and the brands that you love actually does have resonance and is a powerful tool. We hope that the modern slavery bill will just be one step, and that at some point we can go deeper and look at all human rights in the supply chains. And as Canadians, then we'll be able to also push and vote for legislation that protects us and protects people everywhere else.